Next, we have Eddy from Frost & Sullivan sharing about the market insights and trends of plastic sustainability. Frost & Sullivan sees sustainability as an attempt to provide the best outcomes for the human and natural environments, both now and into the indefinite future. As a global market research and consulting firm, Frost & Sullivan has published several thought leadership market reports about the impact of sustainability across industries and markets. Eddy has more than 5 years of experience in business development, consulting, and research across chemicals, materials, and nutrition industries in Asia Pacific. All right, passing the mic to you, Eddy.
Good afternoon to all of us who are in the room here today. Today, I'm going to walk you through the market presentation for circular economy, especially the future of plastics by Frost & Sullivan team. So a bit of background about myself as today's Frost & Sullivan presenter. So I'm working now as a consultant in Visionary Science Department in Frost & Sullivan Asia Pacific team. So I have more than 6 years of experience working in the industries. So I've worked in research and consulting for these industries for more than 3 years now, I would say. And prior to Frost, I was also in the same industry, but in a business development sort of position. So now, before we go into circular economy, I'd like to walk you through the Frost & Sullivan strategic imperative because it's very important for us to know what are the factors that might impact a certain industry. So what is Frost & Sullivan strategic imperative? So according to our survey done with the CEOs in the global 500 Fortune companies annually, we realized that the CEO have mentioned growth as the main objective of their KPI and the objective of the whole company itself. And they realized that it is actually quite hard to achieve sustainable growth. So why is it so? So Frost & Sullivan, we have come up with our model after doing a lot of research, and we have identified 8 key factors which are creating pressure to your company's growth. So basically, these are the 8 factors that a company like yourself, let's say if you're in a plastic company, you are in a FMCG, brand owners, you should look at these 8 factors which are impacting your business. So the 8 factors are business models. So I'm not going to go into each and every single details. So we have business models, innovations, value chain compression, basically direct to consumer model. We also have to look at mega trends around us. For example, dematerialization is a mega trend that is impacting the plastic industry. You also have to look at internal challenges. I think this one is so much so relate to us nowadays because all the company is facing internal struggles in terms of how to manage workers working from home during the pandemic, and how do you manage business operations when there's a lockdown in your country. The 5th factor, competitive intensity. So basically competitors is everywhere. You have to look at competitors not just from your own industries, but also competitors from other industries which are not your own industries. Geopolitical chaos. I'm sure all of you have heard of the US-China Cold War in 2019. Since 2020, there's another geopolitical chaos that has affected every one of us in this planet, which is the COVID-19 pandemic. So geopolitical chaos is something that we should be very aware of in the times of uncertainties. Disruptive technologies, for example, blockchain. And last but not the least, industry convergence. So industry convergence is very important, especially for the context of circular economy. So why do I say so? Because if you look at the recent in Malaysia here, FMCO, today is the, let's say FMCO was announced. Do you realize that the essential service, which are allowed to open this time, has included packaging companies, which is something was not included in the first MCO. So this shows that for a food and beverage productions industry to happen, it doesn't depend on the brand owners or the manufacturer themselves. They have to rely on the upstream players of different industries, and all these players, all these stakeholders of different industry, they contribute and they converge into the final objective, which is to produce the food and beverage to all the consumers. So we are no longer talking about one single industries in this moment. We are talking about how different industries have converged into achieving industry-wide objectives. So I've talked a lot about the 8 factors that are impacting the growth of your companies. So what are the 3 I would summarize 3 strategic imperatives that a plastic company should look at if they want to achieve circular economy. First, industry convergence. I think that one I have just touched about it. basically you have to work with value chain participants, not just your own company. You have to work with the converters, you have to work with raw material suppliers. All these industries are already converged into one single objective, which is to produce the end product for a brand owner. Transformative megatrends. Just now I mentioned about dematerializations. Nowadays, people are very concerned about sustainability, especially in the developed regions of the world. So this sort of trend will drive the demand for plastic circularities. And third is disruptive technologies. Blockchain is one of the very important technologies that's gonna drive circular economy. And this will disrupt the whole plastic economy, because never before have we witnessed technology like blockchain come into picture in a plastic industry. So this is just a framework that we use by understanding what are the market trends, what are the market opportunities that will help a company like yourself to build strategies and to implement these strategies and achieve your goal if circular economy is one of the goals of your companies. So I mentioned that all these mega trends, all these strategic imperatives are affecting every single industries in this world. So these also affect the plastics and composite industry, which is the focus of today. So I'd like to tell or explain how Frost & Sullivan, we define the industry, because different firms might have different interpretation or segmentation of the plastic economy. So basically by end-use application, we have segmented the industry into 5 most key end-use applications. For all the smaller end-use, we have grouped into a whole category called others. As for polymer types, we have actually 6 key polymers groups, and all the rest of the polymers we have grouped under a category also called others. So here are the names of the polymers. And this is how we define the whole value chain, the participants in each and every stage, from raw materials all the way to end products. So when we come up with our analysis, we actually interact and we actually collect data and insights from each and every participant that we have defined here in the value chain. So now I will walk you through what are the current state assessments of the market for plastics. What is the consumption level by end-use application and also by the type of polymer. So let's look at from the top, right, from top to bottom. What is the current market size of plastics being consumed globally? So if you look at the chart here, 2019, according to our own estimations, there's around 370 million tons of plastics which are consumed. And for us, we project there's a 3% of moderate growth from 2019 all the way to 2025. This is the market size by volume. And then by end-use application, as you can see here, packaging is the most used industry of plastics. So it accounts for almost 40% of the total use of plastics by volume, followed by B and C, which is building and constructions. Miscellaneous here refers to industrial, medical, so mostly on the industrial side of things. And then the rest are consumers, automotive, electronics, and so on. So here, today, the focus is more only on the packaging side of things. So I'd like to shift the focus only on the packaging side. So packaging, as you can see, 40% of the total volume consumption. But in terms of lifespan, it is the lowest among all the industries. So what do we mean by lifespan here? It's very important to look at lifespan of the material, because it actually means how long the product is going to be used. So a long lifespan means that the product won't be converted into waste in the near or medium term. But if your lifespan is very short, like packaging industries, it means that you are being converted into waste in a very fast time. Or in other words, most of the cases, we call them single-use plastics, which all of us are pretty familiar of. So packaging, most used industry of plastics, and also the most industry with the most number of single-use plastics, as shown in the graph here. Now, people also ask, like, what is the impact of a pandemic on the total plastic industries? So according to our qualitative assessments as of now, the numbers are still coming in, but we expect a 2.5 to 3% growth in 2020 because of the pandemic. So there's a mix of impact actually of the pandemic on the plastic industries. For example, automotive industry has really drop or decline in 2020. And that's why there's a decline of plastic usage in the automotive industries. But on the other hand, packaging has rise. The use of packaging the market has grown a lot in 2020 because of the shift of consumer lifestyles. Because of the countrywide lockdown, people are forced to eat at home and do takeaways. And we see a huge surge of packaging demand in 2020. So the growth of plastics differ by end-use industries. And because of the high use of packaging in 2020, we expect the growth to be more or less around the growth that we projected in 5 to 6 years' time. So conclusion is the COVID has impacted the plastic industries, but we still expect and we still will see a positive growth in 2020 and also in 2021. But of course, the growth rate differs by industry. So in terms of global producers, where are the plastic being produced? So as you can see here, Asia Pacific produce almost half of the plastics that we are using all around the world. And China alone produce more than 30% of the global consumption of plastics. So this doesn't mean, this graph doesn't mean the split of demand by regions. If you look at demand or consumption level, I would say Asia Pacific is almost 1/3 of the consumptions. Whereas you will see US, North America, they have 25% of the consumptions, 20 to 25%. Europe, again, also around 20 to 25% level. How about by polymer? As you can see here, PE, PP, these are olefins, and PET, these three resin compose nearly 60% of the global demand in 2019. But in terms of waste, right, they actually account for 95% of the total, we could say, recycled plastic demand. So what does that tell us? It tells us that out of so many plastics, these three plastics are the most focused when it comes to recycling or when it comes to circular economy, and especially the PET. So if you look at the chart here, PET consumption might only be less than 10% all around the world, but in terms of recycling volume ratio, it's actually more than 40% here. So PET has the highest average recycling rate of more than 18%, followed by PE, polyethylene, and the least recycled key polymers are actually polypropylene and also polystyrene. All right. So as you can see here, PP is become the focus of a lot of the global companies because PP is actually the second highest plastic usage all around the world. But in terms of recycling volume, it actually is quite a small volume yet. To establish circular economy, it's important to look at what happens when your wastes are collected. So just now, we estimate that the consumption of plastic is around 370 metric tons in 2019, but not all the plastic are converted into waste. Only 45 to 50% are actually becoming the waste. And out of this 175 metric tons of waste, as you can see, 41% still go to the landfill, 30% goes to incinerations to collect the energy, and only 30% or 29% of the plastic are being recycled. If you want to look at packaging industry only, the rate of recycling is even lower. It's only at 14%. Just now, the 29% was the total plastic recycling rate. Packaging is very much lower, 14%. And not all 14% are being used in the closed loop. Only a mere 2% are being recycled back to where it is originally used. 8% goes to different applications. And this 4% loss basically just means they are not being sorted in the right way. So in the end, they become either go back to the landfill or they are being dumped into different areas. So the goal of a circular economy is to be something like what the Ellen MacArthur Foundation has defined. So everyone has their own definition of circular economy, but in general, all are heading towards the same objective. The concept is still around reuse, recycling, energy recovery, and composting. And the major chunk of it should be around recycling and also reuse in a closed loop manner. So just now I talked about plastic market situations. So how about circular economy? How much has circular economy driven the market as of today? So it's important for us to know what are the forces that impact the circular economy adoptions, what are driving it, what are challenging the circular economy to be adopted as fast as we wanted to. So we have identified 5 driving forces or drivers that are going to make circular economy works globally. So first of all is the consumer awareness. It's very important to know that this is very obvious in developed regions like US, like Europe, Japan, and Korea. So in these countries or regions, the consumer themselves are very self-driven, and that's why circular economy has been a higher success in these countries. Sustainability and environment. This one is from the perspective of the governments and also the NGO initiatives. A lot of country has already started to implement or introduce sustainability goals as part of the country's national growth. For example, EU, everyone has already heard, right, that they have this EU goal, which is to achieve net zero carbon by 2050. They want to achieve green, totally green economy within 30 years' time. And same goes for US and some other countries like Japan, Australia, and so on. Whereas for Asia Pacific, especially for countries in Southeast Asia, Malaysia included, the initiative of circular economy is still much driven by the global brand owners or the OEM players. So they have a very important role to play at this as a start for developing countries at least, because sustainability goals, they have already incorporated that in their business services or even in their business products. They have worked not just in their base country, they have already implemented or introduced circular in all their products all around the world, not just where they are being based. So they have a very important role to play when it comes to driving the circular economy in this part of the world. Tightening regulations. This is again from the government's perspective. Whether government impose tax, whether government impose bans on single-use plastics. So all these are very important elements that will drive the industry to recycle and also to reuse the plastics, as people are so-called like forced or being enforced to do something. Last but not the least, responsible investing. Nowadays, investors, they are more interested to invest money into companies which have sustainability goals, especially with related to economic, social, and especially environment. So the companies which have sustainability missions or roadmap are the ones that will be targeted and also that will attract the global investors. So again, I already touched upon how the OEMs or the global brand owners roles are, not just in their home country, but also all around the world. So they have already more or less have a plan, sustainability plan in their products. So as you can see here, all these 5 companies, they have committed, they have pledged by 2025 or by 2030, they will at least make more than 50% or even 100% of their packaging into recyclable and reusable types. But not everything goes as smoothly as it wanted. There's a lot of challenges to circular economy, and these are the things that all of us here or even all the stakeholders have to look at, because if you want to make circular economy a big success, these are the challenges that we have to overcome or address. And we break down the challenges into 3 different areas: operational, competitive, and regulatory. So here is the list of what are the operational challenges that the industry is facing. So I'm not going to go into each and every one of them. If we look at the first 2 operational challenges, I think people who are in Malaysia, we can definitely relate to that. So the first operational challenge here, small-scale collections and lack of large-scale facilities. So this is almost like a bottleneck of why circular economy still not yet kick off in developing countries, because in terms of infrastructure and facilities to recover the materials is still a bit lacking. So for Malaysia, for example, the key player of waste management company, let's say Alam Flora has a lot of assets, but when it comes to material recovery center or facilities, they only have 1 to 3 throughout Malaysia, because most of the assets are going into landfill, going into incinerators and so on. So that shows there's a lot of work in progress. There's a lot of improvements that that we can look at if we want to recover the materials to be recycled. And second operational challenge here, cross-contamination and mixed plastic waste. So a lot of cases, a lot of the people around the world, especially on the developing countries, they still don't have the awareness yet, like how to sort the plastics, metals, papers, and so on. And when it comes to the recovery centers, they find it very hard to separate the waste. There's a contaminations because it wasn't being sorted earlier at the source point. So because of that, they are not being used for recycling. They are end up in the landfill. So all this can create a lot of obstacles on how circular economy couldn't really take off as we wish. Regulatory. I think the first one, ban on the shipping waste. I think this one, if you all remember in 2018, China created almost like a global havoc at that time by banning the import of plastic waste into their countries. So as you all might know, right, China has been the world's largest importer of plastic waste. They import almost 50% of the global plastic waste into the country and they process it. But in 2018, the country has decided to ban the import of plastic waste, and all the plastic waste just suddenly shift to other countries, including our beloved country, Malaysia. So at that time, there was a lot of debate, like what are we going to do with the plastic waste and so on. So there's a lot of political tension or political debate here. But the things that I'm trying to get at is it will become a challenge if globally the countries don't collaborate on how the plastic waste are being recovered or where to ship this plastic waste. For example, US and Australia, they always are the one that export a lot of plastic waste outside of the countries for other countries to process it. Can they do it themselves? So all these have to come into play. All these have to be discussed because at the end of the day, I believe each country has to find a common ground on how to sort their own plastic waste. The second regulatory challenge, lack of national standards and regulations. I think this one is related to the government. What sort of recycling targets that they need to make? What are the initiatives that they have to do? Malaysia has been progressing quite well, especially in this level, because in 2019, we have our single-use plastic roadmap towards 2030. That was a very good start in terms of how a country or how the society can together achieve the goal to avoid plastic waste. So in that case, a lot of countries would have aspired to do the same, like what Malaysia has done. And of course, this is differed by countries. And in Europe and US, these two regions, a lot of countries have already set the standards. So now we are hoping that more countries in the developing side, they hope they can join the journey and implement national standards and regulation across their own countries. Another aspect of challenge is from the competitive side. For example, we realize there's still a very limited number of well-developed collaborative initiatives. When we say that it's between brand owners, for example, and the government. So are the brand owners only working with the retailers in terms of the waste collections? Are they working with the government or the local municipals in terms of collecting the recyclable waste? So all these things has to be spelled out. And in order to achieve a better results, the collaborations has to be clearer in each and every single country. Last but not the least, abundance of lower price virgin resins. So this is again related to the supply and demand of the recycled resins. There is a demand for recycled resins, but the supply is not yet meeting the demand. And that's why the price of recycled resin are still very high, higher than the virgin resin itself. So again, this impact on how the industry players adopt their strategies. Some companies who are not as global as the MNCs, they might find it difficult to adjust the cost of incorporating the higher pricing of recycled resins. So this slide shows how each participant in the value chain has come up with initiatives to improve or to contribute to the circular economies. And out of all these initiatives by each value chain participant, we have actually grouped them into teams. So here you can see there's a total of 8 teams about circular economy. So there's never a team that we can represent the whole circular economy, we have to divide into several key themes. So for today, we're going to focus just on two themes, which are mechanical recycling and also the chemical recycling. So here, mechanical recycling basically means not using any chemicals process to recover the waste. So about the circular theme, mechanical recycling, as you look at the chart here, when the waste arrive at the mechanical recycling facilities, only 50 to 55% of the waste are successfully being recycled through mechanical means, whereas the other 45% still goes to the incineration and landfill. So in order to improve this, right, there have to be ways that those non-mechanical recycled can still be recycled, and that's where the chemical recycling methods take place. Here is an example of a plastic packaging company called Alpla. So they are actually adopting mechanical recycling in their facilities. So how it works is that the waste, the bottles which are being collected, they are initially being recycled to produce other sort of used products such as fiber, film, and so on. But eventually, along the way, they have tried to implement this bottle-to-bottle recycling, which is basically recycling the waste back to where it is being used, which is the bottles. And this is so-called like a circular economy because they are able to recycle back the recycled rPET resins back to the converters and become a reuse or a recycled plastic bottle again. So here again is to show that how the companies can improve in terms of mechanical recycling rate. As you can see, in terms of waste collected, half of it still goes to the incineration and landfill. And to improve this point, it is important to have also a chemical recycling method so that we are able to recuperate those who are not being able to recycle through non-mechanical or through mechanical methods. So here is the chemical recycling method, which is the purification and depolymerization. So the difference here is they actually use chemicals processes in order to recuperate the materials out of the waste. So for example, if we look at purifications, right? So the waste, the plastic waste which is being collected, they are purified by using a solvent, and ultimately through filtration, through precipitations, they are able to recuperate the resins and use the resin back to where it is being used. Another way is called depolymerizations. So this is a reverse process of polymerizations, how resin is being made. So this will be able to convert the plastic waste into monomer level. And from that monomer level, again, you can use the polymerization method in order to produce the purified or near to perfect resins again. So in terms of, this is a case study. So P&G, which is a global consumer goods company, they actually have developed their own patented technologies on how to purify, and they actually license these technologies to their partner, which is called PureCycle. So PureCycle is a company in US which helps them to recycle the PP plastic packagings and to reuse again in their own products. Another case study is the recycling of polyester, PE. So Eastman has developed a technology called polyester recycling technologies. So they are able to use their technologies patented to create and to recover the monomer of polyesters. And these recycled monomers will again be used to produce the recycled polymer, which is then used by the brand owners. So a lot of companies, this here is a list of key participants that we can identify. They are involved in the chemical recycling processes, either in purifications or either in depolymerization. So here is a nutshell. In summary, as you can see here, globally, mechanical recycling is still the most conventional way of recycling method, with around more than 80% of share, whereas chemical recycling is only less than 20%. In terms of future growth, we believe that there's a huge growth potential of chemical recycling because mechanical recycling can only apply to certain plastic waste. But when it comes to more difficult waste or those who are not mechanically recyclable, the use of chemical recycling is very important, especially processes such as depolymerizations and purifications. So we expect to see a huge growth in terms of chemical recycling and also a moderate growth for mechanical recycling in the next 5 years. So all in all, today we only touched on 2 key themes. There are also 6 other themes which are equally important. As of today, only 10 to 15% of the plastics contain some form of circularity, but we believe by 2025, there will be at least 25% of the plastic industry globally, which will have some form of circularity. And this can only be achieved by having progress and improvement across the 8 themes that we have mentioned today. So that's all for my presentations. If you have any questions, you can leave your message and you can contact me through my number and email. Thank you.
All right. Hi, Eddy.
Hi, Michelle.
Thank you for your sharing earlier. Yeah, so let's get right into the questions that we have. Okay, so earlier you mentioned that the implementations of sustainability are mostly by the larger brands or the global manufacturers as well. So I think the question here is, how would you comment on the readiness level of the Malaysian SMEs, especially in plastic manufacturing, to embark on the circular economy? And yeah, if you have any advice as well on how they can kickstart.
All right. Okay. So that's a very good question on the SME side, because I still believe that, in my opinion, MNC, the multinational, should drive this with the government, because we are talking about economy of scale here. So the demand side is very important, and especially the MNCs, they have the cash, they have the infrastructures to do it. So I would always say MNCs should drive from the private side. But for SMEs, that doesn't mean SMEs shouldn't join the bandwagon together with the MNC. I would say SME, there are 2 types, right? Because SMEs, their business can be exporting the recycled plastics to overseas. That's where the demand is. And if the SMEs are just doing for Malaysia, then it can be a bit of challenge, because it always starts from demand. And I believe that demand is still high on the Europe or the US side, because they have already done the circular economy. And whereas in Malaysia, we are still very much in progress. So my advice to the SME in Malaysia, for those who manufacture plastics, recycled plastics, consider to export opportunities, go to where the demand is. I think Malaysia will pick up soon, as long as the government pick up some regulations. And I believe SMEs has a role to play together with the MNCs. But of course, it depends on which markets are you looking at. Whether you're looking at export market, whether you're looking at Malaysia specifically, then I would say it's still a challenge for the SMEs for now.
Okay. Would you maybe you can also suggest whether a circular economy model would be profitable for as a business model for SMEs, and in order to push for more implementation locally, would it still be true the export market?
Okay, so I think as of now, right, a lot of SMEs that we heard of, they say that it's not profitable to change the raw material sources, and we actually understand that. We actually feel the same with the industries. So I would say for it to be profitable, it has to come from, I would say, still the demand side and also the infrastructures. So both have to be there. So if you want the demand to be there, first of all, the big players, the global companies like Nestle, Coca-Cola and all, they have to drive the initiatives, and that's where the demand for recycled plastic will go out, and the price will become cheaper, even cheaper or even competitive as the virgin plastics resins. So that's number one. And after that, the infrastructure has to be there. So without a proper infrastructure, the demand won't kick off, and because there's no system in place, right? So infrastructure depends very much on the government and also the stakeholders, the recycling companies and so on. So SMEs have to leverage on the ecosystem players, but at the same time, that doesn't mean that they couldn't look out to export markets, I would say.
Okay. Yes, agreed on that. And further down the presentation, you also shared on the different recycling processes as well. You mentioned that mechanical recycling is the most conventional way. However, there is someone that commented like mechanical recycling is not applicable so much in Malaysia because of the halal restrictions as well. So would you say that chemical recycling would be you mentioned like chemical recycling will be used even more. And another question asked, like, could you share the outlook for that? It's not that economically viable and also not implemented at a commercial scale yet. So what's your thoughts around that?
All right. Thanks, Michelle, for the question. So I think I have to be honest here. I first time heard about this, that the halal relation with the mechanical recyclability part. So I believe that is something that I have to look into after this presentation, because I didn't, throughout our research by our team and myself, we didn't come across this challenge, which is caused by the halal compliance and so on. Because in our opinion, mechanical recycling, I believe it depends on how we define mechanical recycling. Because in Malaysia, maybe mechanical recycling is something defined differently from the other countries in terms of the process. But what I'm trying to get at is mechanical recycling is still the basic of all. So whenever we think about recycling, usually the conventional one is mechanical recycling. So my definition of mechanical recycling is basically you have the plastic waste, you shred it, you crush it, and then you do some sort of depollutions. And after that, the resins, the recycled resins are immediately being maybe processed into the new products. So that's my definition of mechanical recycling. It also doesn't involve any form of chemical use, for example, solvents. So I believe Malaysia have some sort of material recovery systems in place. I believe they are mechanical recycling. But again, we have to fall back to the definition by each country and by each player.
Okay. Yeah, maybe following up on that, like in terms of chemical recycling, what is your outlook on that? Because as mentioned just now, it might not be as economically viable compared to like mechanical recycling.
Yeah. So chemical recycling. So I think in my conclusion, I couldn't have emphasized more enough on chemical recycling, because Frost and Sullivan, according to our research, right, we forecast chemical recycling growth or adoption is going to be twice or double as much as compared to mechanical recycling. The reason is because there's still some challenges in terms of mechanical recycling. Mechanical recycling can only do that much because mostly mechanical recycling is applicable for PET, or you can argue maybe PE sort of resins. But when it comes to polystyrene, PS, or when it comes to polypropylene, these two sort of resins, mechanical recycling couldn't separate or couldn't turn it into reusable or recyclable resins. So in that case, chemical recycling has to take place. So my advice or my view is that Malaysia or Southeast Asian countries, we have to look at integrated systems, mechanical recycling plus chemical recycling. Like that, we can cover as much plastic resin as possible. And that's where we can achieve our targets by 2025. I think 40% or 30%.
Okay, that's a significant amount as well. So last question, which I find quite interesting, because you shared about the demand of growth in blockchain technology in the plastic industry as well, right? I think one of the questions that is asked is like, what is the opportunity, and is it applicable in Malaysia, since we're mostly the OEM instead of brand owners?
Okay. Yeah, so blockchain is a very buzzy word. It doesn't apply just on plastics productions or recycling, right? It applies on currency and so on. So to be honest, I'm still learning the mechanics of blockchain. So I'm not a blockchain expert, actually. I'm still studying, learning myself. But what I can say is, I think just now there was a question which asked about how do we confirm, or how do we determine the PCR, the post-consumer resin in the final products, right? Let's say in your bottles and so on. So if you look at your current plastic packaging that you have every day, some of it already have the R recycled PET or RPE. But I think the question is mostly on what is the percentage or what is the purity level. So if you want to go to that granularity, blockchain can do that, because blockchain actually trace the resin on each level from the end product all the way to the waste, and then after that the recycling part. So blockchain is able to support that. However, currently the licensing technology providers are all based, I'm not sure whether it's all, but most of them are based in EU and Europe, because they are the one who have the highest demand. So basically more technology players exist in those regions. So Malaysia, I might miss out one or two blockchain companies in Malaysia, but I don't think there's any blockchain company or SME here in Malaysia for plastic recycling. But there's one company that caught my mind. I think it's iCycle. Not sure whether you all heard of it. It's a Malaysian company. They actually do this waste tracing through an app. So there might be some form of blockchain involved. So that just gives you some ideas like what are the current adoption of blockchain in Malaysia right now.
Okay, thank you so much for sharing, Eddy. Yeah, that's the last question that we have. But if you have any questions, feel free to type it in the Q&A. Eddy will be happy to answer them through the Q&A as well. Yeah, so thank you so much. And then if you would like to follow Eddy or Frost & Sullivan, we will have his social media up later on. There's also that chance of getting that one-on-one consultation, having this kind of conversations directly with Eddy as well. So do check out the link in the break later on. We'll see you later. Thank you.
Thank you.